You're listening to In the Balance, an Iowa Judicial Branch podcast. Welcome back. In this month's episode, we are exploring the important work of Iowa's family treatment courts. These treatment courts have been a part of the judicial system for over 14 years, and now, with the help of the Family First Prevention Services Act, is evolving to help families heal and remain together. I had the opportunity for this episode to speak with Kathy Thompson, Director of Iowa Children's Justice, about the work of family treatment courts, and Court of Appeals Judge Mary Tabor about how the Family First Task Force is able to assist Iowa families in new ways. Kathy, thank you for joining me today to talk about family treatment courts in Iowa. Before we dive in, tell us a bit more about your role at the judicial branch as Director of Iowa Children's Justice.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. The Supreme Court of each state receives federal funding from the Children's Bureau, which is in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, to support and enhance the juvenile court's role in achieving permanency and stability for children in the child welfare system. In Iowa, these funds support the Children's Justice Program. I've had the good fortune to be a part of this program for the past 20 years. I started as the grant coordinator and became the director in February of 2017. This has been both the most rewarding and the most challenging experience of my career. There are many facets of our program that offer a variety of opportunities. The Children's Justice Program is involved in the assessment and improvement of juvenile court proceedings, offering educational opportunities for judges who serve on the juvenile bench and attorneys who practice in juvenile court, accountability and compliance with federal regulations, and we get to do some special projects to improve or enhance services for the families who are or may become involved in the child welfare system. Each state is able to identify their priorities, and I have the opportunity to work with a multidisciplinary advisory committee and a state council that help me define what that means for us in Iowa.
Great. And the family treatment courts have been a part of the Iowa judicial branch structure for about 14 years now, beginning in 2007. So how did this type of treatment court get its start?
Well, it's hard to know the exact number of children and families in the child welfare system who are affected by parental substance use, but in 2007, when we applied for a federal discretionary grant to develop family treatment courts, it was estimated that there were 70 to 80% of the families who were becoming involved in the system. A primary contributing factor was parental substance use. Oftentimes these families are struggling with co-occurring issues such as mental illness, a history of trauma, domestic violence, issues associated with poverty, such as unstable housing, lack of access to health care, child care, transportation, and a lack of stable employment. At that time, we were recognizing that the traditional array of services didn't seem to be supporting these families in a way that help them achieve the outcomes we were intending. Also, there was an additional challenge. Congress passed the Adoption and Safe Families Act in 1997 to strengthen the child welfare system and to stop lengthy stays in foster care for children. Primary goal of legislation is to provide for the safety, permanency, and well-being of children. The Adoption and Safe Families Act mandates that courts finalize permanent placements no later than 12 months after a child enters foster care. In 2007, we were hearing that parents were experiencing extensive delays in gaining access to substance use evaluations and then having access to recommended level of treatment services. Sometimes that put them 5 months into that 12-month period. So they were way behind in terms of meeting the priorities that were set out in their case permanency plan. And this timeframes that are outlined in the Adoption and Safe Families Act really aren't realistic in terms of the need for the timeframes and the time to access substance abuse treatment services and to sustain that recovery for parents. So we thought that family treatment courts would be the vehicle that would help move that forward for families. A different approach was needed. We were aware that there were two judges that had started family treatment courts. Judge Carla Foltz started the first family treatment court in 2002 here in Polk County. And then Judge Bill Owens, once he had heard that there was some success with the Polk County Family Treatment Court, he also recognized the dilemma these families were facing, and he decided to begin his family treatment court in 2006. So we had knowledge of that, and we decided that we would try and get some additional funds to support these two existing courts and then 4 additional ones. We now have 12 family treatment courts, and so that really represents one in every judicial district. Some have more than one in their judicial district.
What are the main elements and goals then of these family treatment courts across the state?
Family treatment courts as a whole use a non-adversarial approach to serving these families. The family treatment court programs rely on a multidisciplinary team to work with the participants. These are judge-led teams, and they consist of representatives from the Department of Human Services, substance use treatment agencies, the private nonprofit service providers, attorneys, and peer recovery support specialists that serve the whole family. The family treatment court approach increases the communication between all of these agencies and the families, providing the necessary support and guidance to protect children and either keep families together or assist kids in getting home in a timely fashion. As a result of these partnerships, each of the stakeholders has gained a better understanding of the roles and services available from other team members. An example that we learned right away early on into this effort was substance use treatment providers were not aware of the permanency timeframes I just mentioned in the Adoption and Safe Families Act, and so they didn't realize there was this short window of time that parents really needed to demonstrate their ability to meet the needs of their children. Based on these relationships and some of the education that's occurred amongst the team members, they now have an understanding of this urgent need to have access to these substance abuse evaluation and then access to whatever level of treatment was recommended. So parents are no longer experiencing the lengthy delays that they were when we first started. The family treatment court team meets weekly or at a minimum twice per month with the participants, which allows for timely coordination of services for children and parents and to address any issues that arise more quickly than waiting for the next scheduled court hearing in the regular ongoing child in need of assistance case. In addition to overseeing parental compliance with substance use treatment and other juvenile court orders, the team also makes recommendations to the judge for responses to encourage positive behavior and to discourage noncompliance. Although I mentioned that it's a family treatment court team and a lot of the responsibility is shared, the judge is ultimately the team leader in the family treatment court process because of the court's legal responsibility to make judgments about the best interests and safety of children. The court appearances create a valuable opportunity for the judge to interact with each of the parents in the program regularly, providing immediate responses to their compliance or non-compliance, and to support them as they continue to address the tasks outlined in their case permanency plan. The participants in our family treatment courts have said that this time with the judge has been one of the most important experiences for them in the family treatment court program, and for some, it made a huge difference in making a better decision for themselves and their families. The courtroom is basically transformed into an opportunity for judges to acknowledge the success of parents and their families, and this increased communication and information sharing allows the case to progress much more quickly.
That's great. And after 14 years, even longer for some of these treatment courts, it's safe to say that there's been very successful outcomes throughout the state. So what does that success look like for courts and for the families and children involved in these programs?
Overall, the outcomes have been positive. In the past 14 years, we've served over 1,500 families, 1,700 parents, and just under 3,000 children. As a result of participating in the family treatment courts, parents are more likely to complete substance use treatment, have longer lengths of stay in treatment. Children are more likely to remain in their parents' care without having the need to be removed from the home. And for those that do get removed from the home due to safety concerns, they tend to be reunified more quickly. Children are also less likely to suffer a recurrence of maltreatment within 6 months of the entry into the family treatment court program. Overall, we've continued to collect all of the data that we did on our federal grants. We now have access to 14 years of data, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And in December of 2019, there was a new pilot project started called 4 Questions, 7 Judges, and it was launched by the Iowa Children's Justice in unison with the Iowa Department of Human Services. What is this project's aim, and what outcomes has the child welfare system seen so far?
Until recently, the child welfare system has been basically working or operating as a system that investigates concerns of abuse, then removes and places children outside of the home. So it was one that was more reactive. Though this approach was really based on an overabundance of caution, instead of finding ways to remove the safety concerns and strengthen the family as a unit. A decision's been made to shift the focus to meeting families in their communities well before these crises points start. Efforts are being made to move in this direction right now. It was determined that one way judges can help avoid unnecessary removals is by asking a series of 4 simple questions. The questions were designed to assure that all possible options were explored before decisions made to remove a child from the home, because what we've learned is that removal really is traumatic for kids. So the system that's supposed to keep them safe was now causing trauma for the child. During the initial test phase of these 4 questions that 7 judges volunteered to ask, we were able to reduce the rate of removal for these children by half.
Wow.
And then for those kids that were removed, where a decision still was made for them to be placed temporarily out of their parents' care, they were placed with relatives or with someone who was familiar to them and not in licensed foster care. So it was a less traumatic move for the kids. Basically what we know is children do best when they're able to remain with their families, and so we're doing everything possible to support that approach right now.
And lastly, if there's one message that you want to leave listeners with about the work of Iowa's Children's Justice today, what would you like it to be?
When I was trying to put my thoughts together, I started thinking about the pandemic, and I think if there's one thing we learned from our experiences during the pandemic is that we do have the ability to change. We know that we can and we must do better for the kids and families we interact with in the child welfare system. We need to establish a new normal that disentangles poverty from neglect. We need to create a child and family well-being system that recognizes that we all have a role to play in ensuring that children and families thrive and keep families strong and children safe in their own families. A new normal means that every aspect of the child welfare system needs to join in this transformation. We need an array of services from prevention to supporting families who have made a lifelong commitment to a child who is unable to return to their biological family. All of this begins by building relationships, listening, and engaging families in the change efforts. Moving away from what has been standard practice will take time, but investing in strengthening families will also strengthen our communities. By shifting our thinking from reacting to families in crisis to creating an environment that equitably protects and strengthens families, will allow us all to thrive in our communities.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for your time, your expertise, and all this knowledge today, Kathy. It's been great.
Thanks, Marissa.
To learn more about the Family First Prevention Services Act and how it is working in tandem with Iowa's family treatment courts, I sat down with Court of Appeals Judge and Family First Task Force Co-Chair, Mary Tabor. Thank you for being with us today, Judge Tabor. You are currently a judge on the Iowa Court of Appeals and a part of the Family First Prevention Services Act task force here in Iowa. How did you get involved with this task force?
Well, first off, thank you so much for highlighting the work of the task force. The task force was the brainchild of then Chief Justice Mark Cady, and it was a reaction to Congress passing the Family First Prevention Services Act in February of 2018. The new law, it really dramatically shifted the focus of child welfare system by changing the way that the states had access to the federal funds, known as 4E dollars, and 4E is a division of the Social Security Act, which really works as the funding stream for foster care and adoption assistance. And so Justice Cady, I think, wisely anticipated that the law would have a sweeping effect on state courts. So then in November of 2018, he appointed a task force to study those impacts and also to determine how the judicial branch could work better with our partners at the Iowa Department of Human Services. That was really kind of the key point people for implementing the federal legislation. So the task force includes juvenile court judges from across the state, from all 8 judicial districts, and I had the honor of being the representative from the Iowa Court of Appeals on the task force. Our court handles most of the child welfare appeals in the state, so during my 10 years on the court, have developed an expertise in that area of the law.
Mm-hmm. You have now also taken on the role of co-chair with Kathy Thompson, who is the director of Iowa Children's Justice here, and Court of Appeals Judge Julie Schumacher. What are your goals for this task force in the coming years?
Yes, it's been my real pleasure to co-chair the task force with my colleague, Judge Schumacher. We took over as co-chairs when Justice Susan Christensen was elected to be the Chief Justice of the Iowa Supreme Court, and we teased that it took both of us to fill her shoes. And Judge Schumacher and I have done this past year what we've been calling a virtual roadshow, doing Zoom meetings with constituency groups that have an interest in the implementation of the new law. For example, recently we did a meeting with volunteers with the foster care review boards and the court-appointed special advocates, the CASAs. So now that the risk of the pandemic is lessening, we're hoping to have more of a real roadshow and do those trainings in person. Mm-hmm. But the trainings reflect, I think, that in the first couple years in 2019 and 2020, the task force members were really trying to get a handle on the theory behind the new legislation. And how the programs we already had in Iowa, the child welfare programs, how they would fit into the theory of that federal legislation, and determining what scaffolding might be needed to be added to provide those prevention services across the state. And so a big emphasis, obviously, then was training for constituency groups And that included, of course, our juvenile court judges, but also lawyers, lawyers for the parents, as well as lawyers for the children, GALs, and also county attorneys and agency attorneys that represent DHS. So we tried to do a cross-pollination of those groups, and social workers are also part of the training, juvenile court officers. So that was the emphasis in the early years. So now I think, to more directly answer your question, then in 2021 and moving forward, I think we're shifting our emphasis a little bit from the theory to the practice, and try and sort of look at the more of the boots on the ground, so to speak, how the implementation of the prevention services is moving forward. And from there, and when Judge Schumacher and I presented to the Supreme Court on the task force report a year ago, the justices, I think, were interested in measuring the data of how the act was rolling out and what success it was having. So I think that data collection is going to be one of our emphasis going forward. We're hoping the data shows that the new act has cut down on the need to remove children from their families, if the prevention services can make their homes a safe place for them to stay.
Right. And you mentioned some of that infrastructure that already exists in Iowa. And how does this new act currently work in tandem with our family treatment courts and our children's justice initiatives?
I believe the Family First really frames the philosophy for all the work that we've been doing in the judicial branch around children's justice. Whether that's our traditional child welfare cases or the family treatment courts, also extending to our juvenile justice system and delinquency cases. If we can reduce the need for the children and families to come into our courts, then we've really succeeded. It's never going to be 100% positive outcomes, but if we can make real progress toward keeping the families together, that will mean less trauma for those children, less disruption in the families. And like the achievements of the family treatment courts, I think we'll really see kind of in the broader community a strengthening of the families across the state. So that's the hope.
Right. And with this new funding from Family First, what services will now be available to these families who are deemed candidates for foster care?
Yeah, and you point out the candidates for foster care is the terminology from the Family First Prevention Act. And the federal reimbursement is available for basically 3 kinds of help for those parents that fall into that category. The first is for substance abuse issues. The second is for mental health services. And then the third is for in-home services that includes kind of the traditional parenting skills classes, and also for individual and family counseling. And what's really key about those services in the federal act, what it requires is that they be trauma-informed and that they also be quality services. So in social scientific terms, the services have to be evidence-based, which means that they have to be proven to work after going through independent studies with control groups, not just someone's kind of gut feeling that this is going to be a good service, but they have to have that proven track record. And the Iowa Department of Human Services has, already recognized some programs that fall into that area. The Safe Care program, our Parent Partners program are a couple that they're highlighting. So that's a good aspect that we're sure they're going to be quality programs. The prevention services also include what's called a Kinship Navigator program, and that helps supports grandparents or other relatives that have stepped in and taken responsibility for children when their parents haven't been able to care for them. And just to highlight one more prevention service that's going to be available, and it's a little bit outside the expected norm. It's not as obvious maybe as those other services, but that's the fact that federal dollars are now going to be available for attorneys to represent those families before the families end up in court. And we're really excited that the state public defender has pilot programs that they're in the process of rolling out in 6 different Iowa counties. 3 of those are urban counties, and 3 of them are rural counties. And the goal is to see what model of representation will help the parents avoid having children in need of assistance petitions filed. And so it's kind of the kind of wraparound services that lawyers can help families with, and it would include like housing and public benefits, education issues, employment, all with the goal of reducing child neglect in those
Right.
families. So that's another exciting opportunity that we're looking forward from the federal act.
Yeah, that's amazing. While the services and work under this act is still fairly new, right? We're just getting into the phase of that boots on the ground. Have you guys seen any outcomes for the families involved so far?
Yeah, the Iowa Department of Human Services is doing a really good job of tracking how the federal act has impacted families so far. And they're seeing some really encouraging early trends that fewer children are being removed from their parents since the agency started implementing Family First, which was July 1st of 2020. The DHS actually hosts a data dashboard on their website, which members of the public are free to go there and check. It's a really easy way to kind of access how the implementation is going. And those show that the removal rates are edging downward. That can be found at dhs.iowa.gov/dashboard_child welfare, but just going to their website, it's pretty easy to find. The data is actually a little too enmeshed with the unusual circumstances of the pandemic to know for certain if those positive results will hold, but I think that overall there's really hopeful early recognition. I think if we look at the most recent quarter, it shows 3.7% removal rates per 1,000 children, which is down from 4.9 in the same time frame from a year earlier. So definitely encouraging. And beyond even those official numbers, juvenile courts, and this is a really an important role of the judicial branch, has started an early work in the spirit of the Family First to cut down on unnecessary removals by asking DHS social workers when they come before those juvenile judges 4 questions. And I think Kathy Thompson will get into this a little more too, but the 4 questions are, the first thing the juvenile judges, the pilot group was asking was, what can we do to remove the danger instead of the children? And then they would ask the social workers, can someone the child or the family knows move into the home to remove the danger? And then the third question is, can the caregiver and the child go live with a relative or fictive kin, a close family friend? And then the fourth question was, could the child move temporarily to live with a relative or a fictive kin? So those questions, those 4 pretty basic, simple questions, they cut down on removals by almost half.
Wow.
Among the 7 judges who did those. So, and also, even when removals were necessary to prevent danger, the DHS social workers, they made a lot greater efforts to find family members or close friends for the children to live with, which, the more familiarity, the less trauma for the children. So that kind of simple task, I think, really made progress. And so now all juvenile judges on Iowa are being encouraged to use those 4 questions, kind of a broader rollout. So I think that's in the spirit of the law, even beyond the dashboard that the DHS is keeping.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've given us so much amazing information today, especially about Family First. And if there is one message about the work of Family First that you would like to leave our listeners with today, what would that be?
I'd like the listeners to know that our Iowa juvenile judges, they care very deeply about encouraging the welfare of children across the state. And many of our juvenile judges are taking a really strong leadership role in their communities to ensure that Family First is a success. And I think it really kind of comes down to that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And courts are really used to being the cure, like waiting until the family has such struggles that they end up in court. And there'll still be those kind of child welfare cases. But I think here the goal with the prevention services is to wrap those around struggling families to decrease the number of kids that actually have to be removed from their parents. So those removals are like jolting and traumatic and life-changing for the kids. And if they're not necessary, then we really haven't done right by those families. And just as one last thing, I think a goal of their Family First Task Force is we're really hoping it's a catalyst for reducing the racial disparities that we see in our child welfare system. The task force has, and I think will continue in the years to come, to look for ways to address that overrepresentation of children of color and families of color in our juvenile courts. And so we're hopeful that the prevention services will be a way to address that issue as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and your knowledge today, Judge Tabor.
Thank you for inviting me to be here.
Yeah. You've been listening to In the Balance, an Iowa Judicial Branch podcast hosted and produced by me, Marissa Gaal. If you would like more information about Iowa's courts, you can visit www.iowacourts.gov. You can also follow the Iowa Judicial Branch on Twitter and YouTube at Iowa Courts. This episode of In the Balance is now adjourned. Until next time.